Welcome back to Builders the Broken Bazaar. I'm your host, Dr. Tabish Zaman. Now, today, let me begin with somewhere which sits very uncomfortably with us. I'm not starting an argument. I'm not starting with a position I've already taken, but with a feeling that many of us have learned and got accustomed to ignore. Because if you pause and really do that, look at the world not through headlines, but through patterns, something doesn't quite sit right. Governments, they are still spending close to $1 trillion a year subsidizing fossil fuels. At the same time, we are told the climate crisis is urgent, existential, and irreversible. 71% of the people globally, they say they are worried about climate change, but fewer than a third believe anything meaningful is being done about it. And if you feel that gap between what we know and what we tolerate, insurance's losses from climate disasters have doubled in the last decade. Again, democratic freedoms, they have declined globally for 17 consecutive years. Young people, I'm talking about young people, not activists, not radicals, as we've come to know. Young people, more than 60%, they report feeling anxious about the future of the planet they are inheriting. And yet, everything still looks normal. Within the organizational space, emails are sent, meetings, they always begin on time, and there's so many reports which are being written. Of course, budgets are also approved, and we carry on as normal. That to me is the most unsettling part. Not the crisis itself, but how well we've learned to live alongside it. Because we are now living in a world where data is screaming at us, but the systems, they are whispering. And somewhere in between is you and me, trying to make sense of it, trying to remain very professional, trying to remain composed, and trying to believe that the structure we work inside are still aligned with the reality we are facing. But what happens when they are not? What happens when the very institutions designed to protect stability begins to feel like they are managing that very same decline? And that's where today's conversation begins. Because my guest hasn't just observed this tension, she has lived it from the inside. Inside governance, inside accountability, and inside institutions that shape millions of lives. Audit Commission, senior NHS leadership, nearly a decade sitting at board level in a £1 billion organization. For her, decisions that weren't theoretical. Those decisions that carried weight, it had consequences and impacted so many lives. But then something changed, not gradually, but fundamentally. Today, she described herself very, very different, not just as a leader, but as someone who's collapse aware, an XR catalyzer, a coach working with those still inside the system, asking questions many are afraid to voice, a concerned citizen, a mom, and someone willing to publicly challenge government decisions, including speaking out against the proscription of Palestine action. And that matters. That matters because this isn't someone shouting from the outside. This is someone who understands the system and then chose not to remain silent within it. So this isn't a career journey. It isn't a pivot. It's a confrontation between what we are trained to uphold and what we are beginning to recognize. Zoe Cohen, what an honor. And welcome to Builders of the Broken Bazaar.
Wow. Tabish, honestly, I didn't even know you were talking about me in that introduction. It sounded like someone else. Get that. That was an incredible introduction, but I feel very like I'm blushing and very honored. It's lovely to join you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And you know what? I have been sitting with your journey. I have been looking into everything which you have been up to. And again, I mentioned some of them and talking about your audit commission role, your assistant chief executive in the NHS, the corporate affairs. Again, almost a decade with an organization in terms of how big they were. And now you're spending thousands of hours coaching senior civil servant directors and NHS leaders. There's so much to talk about, and I want to go at it step by step. So let's begin with the Audit Commission, where you were part of the machinery that assessed performance, accountability, and efficiency. So let me go straight to it. And I want to ask you, being there, being part of that, and when you were inside the system, did you actually believe auditing and governance, they were genuinely good or genuinely safeguarding that public good for all of us? Or did you see already how it was a mechanism for theatre?
And somewhere in the middle. Gosh, okay. I mean, I went to the Audit Commission in my late 20s, I think it was. So I'd already worked for quite a few years in the NHS before I went. And yeah, I was genuinely drawn to be interested to work in that organisation. I guess for a number of reasons. One is the idea of equity and fairness and distribution of resources and access to resources and good governance and all of those things had appealed to me for like a long time. I did a master's in public health in my mid-20s, and in my dissertation for my master's, I did it on distribution of resources in primary healthcare nursing. That might sound niche, but I'm just using that to illustrate my kind of public health orientation from quite a young age. My interest in and passion for equity, alignment of resources to need, decision making. And so all of that, I guess, is consistent with my interest in working at the Audit Commission. So prior to being at the Audit Commission, I was in my first director role in the NHS, actually, at a ridiculously young age, 27. And then a role came up working in London at the Commission in a sort of senior management role to run value for money studies across a project nationally on education, training and development for NHS staff. So looking at the quality and distribution, etc. of that. And that's, again, that sounds niche, but again, it was speaking to, I guess, my care of public health, my desire to look at bigger systems and not just look at the micro, to sort of see the interconnections all the way through the system, and that fairness, equity and distribution and decision making is something that I've always cared about. So I guess coming back to your question, yeah, I thought that was worth doing. And to shortcut a longer story, because anyone's life is like a weaving of roots and threads in so many different directions, isn't it? Some years later, forgive me, I can't remember the exact date, but the Conservatives demolished, cut, disappeared the Audit Commission. I'm probably under the banner of saving money, but fundamentally it was an organisation that shone light on inequality. And, clearly that kind of right-leaning government particularly, but perhaps any government now, because you can't put much of a fact of paper between them, but shining a light on unequal, illogical distribution of healthcare, of local government services, etc., across the country is not something that actually helps a government that wants to bring in austerity and doesn't want to actually serve the people.
This was a moment, Zoe. I mean, up until this point, of course, you still believed in governance, didn't you? Governance was, I'm not saying you don't believe in it now, but I believe, this is fairly young in terms of how you've gone about describing. It's still early stages in terms of working here, trying to work out in terms of the performance and the efficiency within which you were operating. But tell us a bit more in terms of, for example, when I look at work like Michael Power, he speaks about the Audit Society, where an institution, they begin to measure themselves to demonstrate their own trustworthiness. So how did you see things at that stage when you were still within those circles?
Gosh, I was in my late years. I think I had at that time a belief that there was value in doing the work. There was value in shining a light on inequality and equity. And there was value in doing that in a way that was helpful for those running services, those decision-making about services and those policymakers, such that they might do things better. So call that a bit naive in some ways. Having said that, having worked in total 18 years in public service, I care passionately about public service. And I know that the vast majority of people that I've worked with, either as a colleague or as a line manager or as a coach, are also absolutely passionate about public service and why they do what they do. One of the threads that's coming to mind is how from a young age, I went into the NHS straight from university. This could sound very, very old. I'm very old. And I did the graduate scheme, the NHS management training scheme, as it was called then. It started in 1991. I wasn't even 21 when I started. Pretty soon into my NHS journey, that the nature of the NHS being a political football for politicians was incredibly evident and, it's incredibly frustrating and remains frustrating. Gets in the way of all sorts of sensible decision making. With my gleaning and reflections and learning in more recent years, one could only think that actually having deliberative democracy and citizens' assemblies between the politicians and the NHS could only be a good thing, really, in terms of what the focus of our service needs to be, and how it can meet needs within the constraints, meet real needs, not respond to political whims.
But that remains an important part of your portfolio, isn't it? I mean, it has shaped you in a lot of ways, because you have seen some of those institutional reforms within the NHS, or at least you've been party to that. But my question here is that, in terms of your own experience of where NHS is right now, do you feel those reforms are serving the need, or it has served the needs of where the institution is right now, and how it has taken shape going forward as well, after you left that place?
Well, I left the NHS of my own volition to work full time in my coaching practice in 2009, late 2009. So I wouldn't, and I very much kind of kept abreast of the shifts, reorganisations, changes, etc. in the service for quite a long time. As my focus really shifted in the last 7 years into more and more activism, etc., I paid a bit less attention, and gradually quite a lot less attention, I have to confess, to the detailed machinations, because they continue. There are yet more reorganisations. There's now these things called ICBs, integrated care boards. They've not even been in place that long, relatively. I think maybe 3 years now. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that. They're already being merged into clusters of ICBs. All of that, I'm aware, to ordinary people, that they're used to the kind of, getting an appointment with your GP. All of that probably means absolutely nothing. I don't feel I'm properly equipped to answer your question in a way that my perfectionism streak would like to. My hunch, if I can allow my hunch to speak, would be no. My hunch would be no, because, I would feel confident that a citizens' assembly, correctly, constituted by sortition and allowed to hear a wide range of expertise and evidence, clinical, non-clinical, financial, public health, epidemiological, etc., would come to some pretty sensible conclusions on quite a lot of things, some of which would probably be better than the political palaver and reorganisations that get put in place. And I'm pretty sure that the proportion of NHS spend on private sector has been increasing for some years, and probably has increased a lot recently. And I'm aware, I think I'm right in saying this, that Wes Streeting here is single biggest donors, I think, of private healthcare. I think I'm right in saying that. There seems to be increasing evidence of it. I think I read about a paper, some research done in the States recently. I think it was an academic paper, but I sort of read the non-academic summary around the venture capitalist-owned healthcare, or healthcare that's taken over by venture capitalists, ends up with worse outcomes, like significant, like higher death rates. More people die. And that's not surprising, is it? It's not surprising. It's
a pattern, I think, which we are seeing more and more. And again, for me, getting into the NHS, I mean, that was, 2013, 2014, when I started my study. And again, you're naive, looking into the impact of technology and the argument around how technology can save lives. And we are seeing how that has been slowly integrated with, the external agencies coming within the NHS and trying to, do a lot of different things. And again, some of the things you mentioned. But you see why, Zoe, I'm stuck at it, why I'm asking you these questions. Not because, of course, not pointing specifically to numbers as such, but your experience within the upper echelon of, where some of these leadership decisions are taken, as to who we are meant to work with, who are these individuals, who are these organizations going to come into it. So from your perspective, looking at looking at these big high stake decisions. Could you talk to us about the paradox you feel or paradox there is when we are talking about how institutions like the NHS, I will mention Ulrich Beck, who's mentioned about the risk society, how institutions produce the very risk they then attempt to manage. When institutions are trying to solve at the same time, they're producing that fragility as well. So how did you handle that, Zoe? Because like I said, you have spent so much time and across different spaces as well. Could you talk to us about that and how that made you feel?
Gosh. Yeah, and I would preface what anything I say in this regard or anything I say about the NHS, to be honest, Tabish, with I'm always at pains to never oversell myself. Like I'm don't want to oversell the roles that I did and the power that I had and all that kind of thing. I'm sure much more modest than you make it sound. So reflections, at some distance of 16, 17 years since I left the service, although I still do work with colleagues in the NHS, fewer than I used to. Certainly for the first 10 years, I worked with a lot of NHS colleagues on a regular basis as clients right across the country.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you were talking about fragility, and it's a good word. There's a lot of in that word, isn't there? I guess your question sort of made me think of other aspects that I didn't bring into the previous answer because it's all interconnected, isn't it? Around around prevention and public health, and having had a kind of public health and epidemiological orientation since I was really young, and that being what sort of led me to want to go into public health, which is kind of what I did in my mid-20s in the NHS, and I did a master's in public health and was going down that career track. That's a whole other story. But I, not only, as I've already alluded to and referred to, that equity, distribution, decision-making and fairness and according to need was something I was really passionate about, but also prevention. I mean, that links to that fragility, creation of fragility, doesn't it, that you've described, and the whole upstream, downstream stuff. And that's just everywhere, isn't it? I guess there's so much of that in our NHS system, isn't there? And you can't even just draw a line around the NHS. You have to look at social care, but you also have to look at the food system and the pharmaceutical system, etc., etc. And if you zoom out, then we basically have a modern capitalist system which is making us sick and making money out of us when we're sick. I mean, that's the bottom line, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
Monoculture, agriculture, destroying habitats, causing habitat collapse, systemic collapse, whilst feeding us complete crap so that the pharmaceutical industry can make money out of us chronically, that we have to do stuff, for the rest of our lives so that because we're eating and drinking and breathing crap. And and the NHS, bless it, tries to pick up the pieces.
Yeah.
So some really simple stuff in there, isn't there, which is so endlessly frustrating. And I'm going to sound terribly naive, but there's not much money in marketing broccoli.
But do you think our NHS is closer to that reality than most of us imagine, or the way it is all framed by, in terms of how our politicians come on the airwaves and the way they frame it, it is a lot more real than we think it is, and a lot more closer to that disaster we're talking about.
Do you mean, just to check what I'm hearing, do you mean that the politicians come on and make it sound like everything's fine, whereas actually things are a lot more fragile?
I'm talking about the whole charade of managing where we are. And again, we are moving closer and closer to, when I look at the principles of NHS, it was all built on the premise of social innovation, social values. 1947, and here we are in 2026, how far we have moved away from that reality. And looking at the constitution as well for the NHS, the whole privatization, the whole capitalism notion of how we are operating that institution, or even if we are not inside that, from the outside, at least the the framing of how it operates or how it works is a lot closer to the problems, the perils of what is impacting society day in, day out.
I mean, you only have to go into any A&E in any major city or town, and by its very nature, staff in A&E pretty much have to deal with everyone through the door, and everyone through the door represents a kind of manifestation of how society is struggling, isn't it? Really,
Yeah,
I mean, both with all the chronic health problems, obesity, mental health problems, obviously enormous inequality. So many people who can't cope have little resources to cope. I mean, every strain and stress on individuals, families, and communities, one way or another, impacts A&E, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah, it does. It does.
And I feel for those. God, I feel for those staff. They're bloody heroes, most of them. They really are.
And I'll take you out of that space, Zoe. I wanna speak to you a lot more about the equality and the human right aspect within your workspace, because you work with people, at least you worked, and now you're also in that space. But this is something for me. This is something for me to look at, where we are talking about how, moments of equality, they are supported in principle, at least in charter, at least in the the memos and the notes. But in actual practice, we are struggling to have that balance between what is written and what happens day in, day out. So in and around the space you work, Zoe, do you feel that you're alone? Do you feel you are struggling, or do you feel you have enough momentum behind you to talk about what's written and what is practiced by the people?
Well, I mean, I don't know if, again, I'm probably being a little bit disobedient and possibly not directly answering some of your questions, but I'm not trying to be. It's often because the questions spark with the thoughts or related thoughts. What came into my head when you asked the question was around coaching practice and the business of coaching and the coaching sector.
Yes.
Because the theme I heard in your question was the difference between what people say and what people do.
Yes.
Or what people say they do and what they actually do, or what actually happens. And I guess I've been attempting to kind of catalyze my own profession here in the UK and beyond since sort of 2019. Yeah, I guess my mind often sees and my body often feels interconnected threads, so it's quite hard to sometimes tease those out into some sort of logical flow of conversation rather than just in a mess. But I guess if I bring it into the here and now.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you so much. So just coming back to it quickly in terms of how you felt some of those notion around equality were supported in principle, but then they were constrained in practice as well. So as someone who spends so much time with leaders and again, assume those leadership role as well, where do you sit with it? Do you feel it being enacted in and around us in the institution? And do you see it as a problem at all, where what gets written and what gets practiced are two different things?
I mean, inevitably what gets written and what actually happens in all sorts of walks of life at an individual and a corporate level is never the same thing, is it? It's just never the same thing, pretty much. What was coming to mind as you were describing your question, Tabish, was actually a particular kind of focus and a passion of mine, which always has been on staff themselves. If I come back to the NHS as an example, and this isn't quite like equality, but it's sort of related. Like on the one hand, we know that the NHS is its staff. It is its staff. It's clinical, it's non-clinical, it's medical, it's nursing, it's auxiliary, it's lab staff, all the different people. I know there's many systems in there and increasing amounts of AI, but at heart, it's people.
Mm-hmm.
And then, quite significantly, we had a health secretary, the current health secretary, who would keep on going about how the NHS was broken if the NHS is the people, that implies that the people are broken and they're fundamentally doing a poor job and there's something wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, what an appalling way to speak about, hundreds of thousands of people right across every community in this country. Yeah. An appalling way to speak about people. And also, like, from a leadership point of view, how ridiculous. It's not going to motivate anyone to tell them that effectively they're broken. Like, rather than taking responsibility and saying, us as we've done such a poor job as politicians and as policymakers in leading this and in giving a consistent direction. We've chopped and changed. We've disinvested, reinvested, isn't it? Chopped, etc. Taking no responsibility at the top, but actually just saying that the NHS is broken. It's bloody incredible what it still manages to deliver, really.
Yes.
And so I know that is, for me, feels like, look, on the one hand, saying a bunch of stuff and it just not aligning to, policies across the NHS will say, our staff what matter most, and organisations that are trying to do their best will absolutely value their staff. Whether it feels like staff are valued at the coalface is another thing. That's another difference, isn't it? What individual organisations say and then how it actually feels as a member of staff. And there are lots of variables that make a difference there. But right from the top, you've got these awful messages coming from the Secretary of State. And then there's also other bits in the system where you can see waiting lists being long, whether it's waiting to see a specialist or in some cases struggling to see a GP, or all of those things. And at the same time, we've got, trainee doctors can't find jobs, can't find specialist jobs to train in because they're not being funded. And just insanity, really, just complete insanity. I mean, NHS workforce planning has been a bit of a dog's breakfast for many, many years, to be honest. And again, political football stuff obviously hasn't helped because it's boom and bust rather than actually some long-term sensible planning with epidemiological data plus clinical data plus citizen input. Yeah, we could do so much better. We could do so much better. I also, as an aside, the amount of AI, the sort of AI revolution being hoped for in healthcare scares me witless, really, in lots of ways, not least the whole Palantir having our data thing and all of that. But also going back, you were talking about fragility, goodness me, that's creating fragility and multiple governance questions, isn't it? Who owns the data? Who has access to the data? How would hardworking IT people in the NHS even know that something had happened to the data? Because how the hell would we know if Palantir had gone and done something? I mean, technologically, would we even know if they'd gone? So that makes me wonder. But also, and I know I'm going to bring in another thread, which in terms of being honest about collapse and the acceleration of the other side of the carbon pulse, to paraphrase Nate Hagen's language, which is likely to be being accelerated by the illegal war in Iran, etc., and all the multiple first, second, third, fourth order consequences and beyond of that. And I felt this when I left the NHS. It feels like a bit of an echo, but even more now. Like, I left the service in 2009. One of the reasons I left, the main reason was to work for myself and shape a different life outside the service. Also, the financial crisis, the banking crisis had happened, and I could see this slow moving tsunami moving like a wall of water moving towards the NHS and public service, thinking we've got maybe 18 months before before stuff hits us. We need to be having a local and national conversation about what do we do? How do we respond to this? How do we get ahead of the curve? And no one I talked to seemed to be in the least bit interested in that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get out before the tsunami hits. And that's what I did, which sounds a bit selfish in the short term, but and it feels like that. It feels a little bit like that again. I mean, if you listen to some of the interviews I'm hearing and all over the place are a bit like this. There's many tsunamis. That reminds me of that, what is now a pretty famous cartoon picture of the waves of like the COVID climate crisis biodiversity. It's like there's wave after wave. And this wave is like, yet another wave is coming and we're not prepared.
No, that is so well put, Zoe. And this is where I want to take this conversation, where, yes, as much as, we're talking about an institution which is so close to our heart, but this is also about you, because you describe yourself as collapse aware right now. So I'm interested, and my audience is interested in knowing a bit more about you. I know you mentioned about 2009 and how you moved out and you saw this coming across. And, for some of us, things have not changed either in terms of, we felt after COVID things would change. We'll look at health and social care more seriously. But again, those discussions have not moved anywhere. But talking specifically about you, that change, that shift, where did it all come from other than that transition away from the public services? Because I look at it coming into this country now 17, 18 years, but this political nexus, or I would also call political paralysis, in terms of how it is impacting some of the public services. Did this awareness emerge to you as well? Did you see it that way as well while you were just transitioning into the kind of work which you do?
Yes, to some degree, for sure. And I think I just like to back up a little bit in the story if I can, because I think you were sort of implicit in your question was I talk about myself as someone who's collapse aware now, and like when did that start? Like, is it? So I just want to contextualize my responses, I guess, with a little bit about that in brief. Then I guess I've come to realize in recent years, I know when we're growing up or when we're younger, we don't always have the same language that we do when we're older, but it doesn't mean we didn't have the same sense of concepts or ideas or thoughts or feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I genuinely believe I had a sort of sense of collapse and an awareness on some level of what was coming from about age 10 or 11 or something like that. Obviously that's going to make me sound a bit geeky, which is probably true. That's fine. I guess linked to another sort of thread of things, the kind of dominant way of thinking in this country and wider separates ourselves from nature and each other, etc. And I still believe that children, very young children, if given half a chance, quite happily poke about in soil and pick up worms and don't see themselves as any different. I think when you're little, you don't see yourself as any different from the other organisms you're knocking about with. If you're lucky enough to, poke about in soil and things like that when you're little, it breaks my heart that lots of kids don't have a chance to poke about in soil and things. And not that I was brought up in anywhere idyllic. It wasn't just suburban, but suburban with a bit of garden and holidays in North Wales. Nothing idyllic or exotic, but enough of an opportunity to poke about in soil sometimes, which I love soil. And I don't know, for whatever reason, probably partly my lovely mum and also just something in me, I never sort of fully separated from nature. Like I never totally bought the separation thing.
Yeah.
So from a young age, I've really, really disliked anthropocentrism, and I still do. I absolutely abhor it completely. And I went, vegetarian at 12 and vegan at 14 and all that kind of thing. Somewhere between 10 and 12, I absolutely loved plants, and I grew loads and loads of plants in my bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere around that age, 10, 11, someone gave me a little terrarium in it, and I put some soil in it, planted a little plant in it, probably a spider plant, the kind of plant you have when you're a kid, and watered it. And then you put the top on. And at some level, I was aware that was a biome, that was a biosphere, that was kind of a micro earth, You've got the soil, you've got the water, you've got the air, you've got the vegetation, you've got the organisms that you've got, and everything just goes around and around it. And it's a system.
Yeah.
I also was aware or becoming aware around that time of habitat destruction, nature destruction, DDT, long-term chemical pollution, etc., etc., etc. And definitely, had a sense from a pretty young age that things were not going to end well for humanity. And that just seemed to sort of be within me from a pretty young age. And I wouldn't have used the word collapse then. But so I kind of, in recent times, I just feel like I'm more coming home to myself rather than discovering anything new. I'm just kind of coming home to myself and being honest with myself. And obviously with the many layers of grief that come with that, because I guess my 10, 11, 12-year-old self probably thought it would happen. It would take longer and it wouldn't happen only a few decades later. I mean, I guess somewhere in the middle, in my sort of 20s and 30s, I got, distracted with trying to earn a living and job, career, having a family and all that kind of hamster wheel, full on hamster wheel stuff. And then not entirely disconnecting at all with the systemic reality, but definitely like being at a distance and working crazy long hours to the point of burnout multiple times in the NHS. It's like, you don't get a lot of time and space with young children and full-time work, do you, to think about a lot else?
But then you stepped into actions. You have always been one of those. And again, building on all of that, let me take you through the XR catalyzer as well, where, you saw that clarity, you saw that urgency. And when you crossed over that line while still working with your clients and your people around you, what did it feel like? What did it feel like been on the other side and stepping into stepping into a different kind of a well, and where real actions taking place, where you're really trying to make people at least understand that shift, understand that impact of if we don't do it now, things are not going to be there for the future. Did you feel that? Did you feel that pushback from the other side? Did your colleagues or did the people you were working with, did they question, what are you doing, Zoe? How's it working for you?
Gosh, there's a lot of questions in there, Tabish. So I'm curious about your language of like the other side and the sides. And so, yeah, I mean, I discovered Extinction Rebellion at the end of 2018. After the first big sort of bridge blocking actions in London in November, I discovered Exile within weeks, and I didn't know those actions were taking place. And I'd recently been bereaved and lost my mum, and my life was very busy and focused on multiple things as well as the loss of my mum. Back in that autumn to 2018, there was also the 1.5 degrees IPCC report came out. And for the first time, that really got some profile, didn't it? And we had Greta, and we had, and the headline was it 12 years to save the world? I think it was 12 years to save the world, wasn't it then? And it was like 2018 to 2030 kind of thing, 1.5 degrees. Yeah, like my arse, we've already passed it, haven't we? But anyway, so yes, basically I discovered Extinction Rebellion and watched what was then called the Heading for Extinction and What to Do About It talk I watched it online in December. I think the version's still on YouTube. I implore people to still watch it. It still resonates just as much as it always did. Delivered by Dr. Gail Bradbrook, one of the co-founders of Exile, and she did the talk in her like front room and videoed it. I watched that and I committed, I cried my eyes out, and I committed there and then in myself that I was going to get arrested and never looked back really. And as soon as Christmas had gone, I sort of found my nearest Exile group, and ran as fast as my little legs would carry me to their first meeting, which was early January in Manchester. And then I guess I did not know what the hell I was doing to start off with. I met about 50, 60 really lovely people, and they were very welcoming. And it was like, and I volunteered to do talks. I thought, oh, well, I know I can do presentations, I can do talks. That's something I can do. I don't really know anything about what else you do, but I can do that. So I sort of volunteered, and people were talking about actions. We're going to do an action. I thought, I don't even know what you're talking about. I was so not a direct action activist. I did not know what people were talking about, which sounds ridiculous, but I'm being really honest.
That was the first time, was it? That was the first time.
That was the first time that I went to a meeting and actually I kind of properly got involved from January 2019, and then began doing some very tame small actions. And then that led up to the April Rebellion in London and the 10 days of, blocking parts of central London and my first arrest. And I don't want to glorify arrest through this. That's not what I'm trying to do.
But we want to talk about it a bit, Zoe, because it's a different world now, isn't it? Where we are talking about the young generation, or at least the new group of people who are looking to make things happen, and they see it as a way of, going against the institution. So what would you say to that? What would you say to that? Are there things which you've got to look at before jumping into the fray? What does it look like? Is it going against the institution in a way which makes them take note of what we are trying to say, irrespective of what issues we are talking about? And you have gone through that experience. You have put yourself in situation where it has been extremely difficult to process how the institution deals with, your dissent or your questions which you're asking. And obviously arrest is the way where they go about, silencing your voice.
And I don't want to, make myself prominent in this or put myself at the front of anything, because I know that thousands of people made that particular rebellion happen and consequent actions. And having gone from being part of Extinction Rebellion to then insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil and defend our juries and some of the campaigns along the way, it's a mycelium, you know. I've played a part in those to differing ways and in differing extents in all of those myceliums. I want to kind of take it, be a bit concrete, and go back to what I took as an inference from your first iteration of the question around, you know, the side. At the time when I began, you know, I joined XR at the beginning in 2019, and I had my first arrest. I was very much working pretty much full time in my practice still, you know. At the same time, I had, since the end of 2018, also been trying to make sense of what my, you know, climate and ecological crisis, that was the sort of language we used back then. I don't really use that language anymore, but like what that meant for me professionally, what that meant for coaching, what that meant for coaches, because I don't like compartmentalization and barriers and artificial definitions. We're people, aren't we? We're whole people, and we can do things in all aspects of our lives. And that's what the reality demands. It doesn't demand that we just do one polite bit in one bit of our lives and then live the rest of our lives completely normally. It's like, that's not real. So I was getting involved in XR, but I also wanted to think, well, how I'm a coach professionally, and at that time I was absolutely full time as a coach. So I was like, right, okay, what can I do with my professional hat on? So I created my own little model around climate, what it is to be a climate conscious coach, and talked to some people about that, and started talking to people and writing about it a little bit, and was quite shy actually. I should have been much more like patriarchal and just gone out there and trademarked a program or something, but that's not really me. And I've never tried to like monetize collapse. It's not really my thing. But so we all have so many ways that we can, you know, try to have agency in different parts of our lives. Coming back to sort of that interface between the inverted commas climate and coaching, that I was honest with clients right from the off, and I experimented with lots of different ways of like talking to new clients, you know, when you have what's called chemistry conversations at the beginning of a potential coaching relationship, where you and primarily the coachee is trying to work out whether they want to work together with you. You know, it's called a chemistry conversation. I was experimenting with different ways of talking about my activism, but also my values. I ended up really primarily just talking about my values and making my values explicit in that early stage of the coaching conversation, and actually, in fact, a lot of the time, values completely chimed with a lot of the people I was talking to and looking to work with, and vice versa. As I had my first arrest and subsequent arrests, etc., and I found that vast majority of clients and potential clients had no problem with it at all, and a lot of them were supportive. Whether that was reflective of the fact that a lot of my clients were public sector. I'd always worked with both public and private sector, but as time went on, I wanted to do more and more XR activism stuff, so I scaled down and turned down the sort of private sector work that didn't really ring my bell anymore, and was like, right, okay, I'll focus back on my NHS and public sector work. At the time, I also coached senior civil servants, which I absolutely loved.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother story, because I got shut down from that by the system.
Okay. But then I see, Zoe, you've also worked for the, as Manchester Hub Lead for Women in Sustainability, where you worked at the intersection of gender and leadership. Now, this question, I mean, in terms of looking at how climate governance as such is framed, again, who dominates it, the kind of gender we are talking about. Would you agree that if we are looking at a male-oriented leadership, and how
that's quite a leading question. There's some would I agree that? Yes, they would, right? But yeah.
So again, did you see that firsthand when you were working? Was it a case where you were trying to figure out how it all works and where we are at? What's your role within that?
Well, my role, Women in Sustainability, was, I think it still exists, I'm not sure. It was a national network, whereby coaches or facilitators or business or female business people would, run a network, a bit like a franchise. I've been a feminist since I was like this big, and it felt like that at the time, because I think I got involved in it in 2019 and I did it for a couple of years. As it was, it ended up like being something that it didn't feel like I was the best person to do it. It felt like I was better putting my energies in more of the direct action and resistance work than that work. But I enjoyed the network that I ran across Greater Manchester for that period of time, and met some great people. I mean, I guess what I would say, which like certainly echoes and chimes with what you're hinting at, is that, it's well known that impacts of, poverty and everything. Climate impacts are risk multipliers, aren't they? As I know you know, and it multiplies every single risk, every single inequality of risk, every single gender risk, every single political risk, every fragility risk. It just compounds everything and to an exponential level. And it's women and children who get hit first and most and bear the consequences, bear the work, the health consequences, the physical consequences, the monetary consequences, in different ways in different cultures, but nonetheless it is women and also families, children just bear the consequences. It's not the men. And yet the men, I remember reading data from years ago showing that not only do women get more of the consequences and the harm, men tend to have the higher, carbon footprints because of the decision making, the power, the money, and the lifestyles that they lead, as opposed to women. So it's just yet another inequality in the system, isn't it?
Yes.
But actually, it's not. I just belittle. It's not yet another inequality. It's a huge, massive inequality in the system. It's a fundamental one because we also know. I've done a little bit of work with, but I don't want to detract from any of the incredible women who've done the majority of the work, but I've done a little bit of work with She Changes Climate and the co-founders of She Changes Climate. And they've been, working for some years now to really highlight all these issues about disproportionate impacts on women and girls, and also the value that women can bring to the governance, the decision making and the action that is needed. And, I think there's some incredible stats out there. When you have more women involved in peace negotiations, less people die. It's just like, it's kind of bloody obvious, isn't it? Like we need women and we need feminine characteristics as a balance to healthy male characteristics. And we haven't got either of those right now, have we?
Then this is where, I've got two strands here, which I needed to get your clarification on. The first one is, of course, we established the fact that the women leaders, they approach some of the issues very differently. Again, that's a given fact. From your experience, and this is where I want to learn, is do you think institutions actually listen when you have a leadership of that sort, which again is far removed from what we are seeing in United States at the moment, for example, the government. But again, on the front line, on the action line, and if we are leading some sort of movement, do we have evidence of institution listening to women leadership when they're trying to make a change?
I'm sure there's some, but there's nothing that immediately comes to mind. I'm afraid the two examples, and maybe that's a cognitive negative bias in my brain. I feel like they're sort of harking back to the days of the Prime Minister in New Zealand. And so I think back then, like 2019, 2020, that sort of, and around then, there was a small group of female-led countries, wasn't there? Is it Finland?
Angela Merkel. Yeah, we had obviously Jacinda Ardern, and then
Finland, Scotland, New Zealand, and there was a small group of female-led countries who I think were had some evidence that they were more well-being focused and less extreme neoliberal. But I guess it as ever, it's hard within a dominant system, and I guess that what really unfortunately came into my mind, when you asked the question, was two things. One is the Epstein class, which obviously was absolutely firmly operating at the time when people were talking about how lovely Jacinda was and wasn't it wonderful to have female leadership. The people, the Epstein, the Steve Bannons, the Farages, the Borises, the Elon Musk, all of them, the whole body of that Epstein class were busy doing what they were doing and pulling strings and corrupting right, left and centre in the background all the time, and still are. And then the other thing that kind of subconsciously came into my mind and body as you asked your question, Tabish, was my sort of personal experience being in court with my 6 other lovely sisters for the Barclays window break-in action that we did in April 21. A non-violent living intervention to try to get the board of that organisation to listen and to make better decisions, talking about governance. We did that action in April 21 and in November 22, so good 18, 20 months later, we were in Crown Court, in Southwark Crown Court, the 7 of us. 5 of us were self-representing ourselves, including myself. And, that example came to, because it's a big deal to differing degrees of bigness depending on who you are. Experiencing a Crown Court trial is a big thing. I'll never forget it, and I don't know if any of my
that lived with you.
it's never going to go, that experience of being in Crown Court trial, for lots of reasons. We were 7 women, and with all white male judge, and in the crazy wig and all the crazy outfit, on a pedestal, on a platform 6 foot above us, or all that kind of stuff. And that judicial system and everything that goes with it certainly doesn't really listen to women. It was pretty easy to belittle. We still have all those, unfortunately, there's some of those misogynistic stereotypes and things, don't we, about hysterical women, and still stands. And yet there wasn't a thing that any of us were saying in that witness stand that wasn't absolutely true about the impacts, and the impacts are playing out now. And yet that judge was more than happy to consider us that we were violent and that we had a high level of responsibility for what we did, and he was happy to put us in the highest level of category for criminal damage, facing up to 4 years in prison for basically speaking the truth and doing the most minimal thing to try to get one of the world's biggest banks, or the country's biggest banks, to actually do something. But so no, I think there's lots of places that women are not listened to.
But which is why your work is so important, Zoe, and this is why I was so keen on speaking to you, because you have not stopped. You have literally not stopped. And that brings me into what I'm talking about in terms of the Palestinian action and civil liberties, because I know you've been humble throughout this conversation where you've spoken about, but you, for us, and a lot of us, I know at least, you have been that figure, you have been that face where you've challenged the government's proscription of Palestine action. We have seen you literally in terms of how you've gone about doing things. And again, as the whole story goes, obviously the High Court ruled it unlawful, and you worked inside governance. So you really understand that executive authority. So when that decision came about, and within the environment, the climate we're talking about, what were your feelings? What were your feelings having been on the struggling side in terms of protesting and obviously going through that motion, and then those ruling came about, and we are still seeing now. So give us your perspective. What does it make you feel? And how do you see it?
Okay. So just for a bit of context for listeners, if they aren't completely familiar with what we're talking about the UK government's prescription of Palestine action. And the first time ever in British legal history, as I understand it, that a non-violent direct action group has been prescribed as a terrorist organisation. And this happened in July last year. And again, honestly, I so strongly, Tabish, want to forward the voices and the bravery and the courage way ahead of mine, and honour Huda Amori, one of the co-founders of Palestine Action, for her courage, for everything that she's done, and to go through all of that process of challenging the British state, obviously with some legal support, but again, a young woman right at the front, just challenging the whole state, basically. And I've got goose pimples as I speak. Anything that I or the other 3,000 plus people who've been arrested as part of this Lift the Ban campaign to challenge the prescription. There's 3,600 odd arrests now in total. I've only done it once. I've only been arrested once for it so far. So there are plenty. There are other people who've done this multiple times. But this group of us going between 18 and 80 plus, incredible group of people, and to honour every single one of them. And at the same time, I think I can speak for myself, and I know I can speak for a number of the people that I've spoken with from that mycelium, that everyone would say that what we've done and what we potentially risk with prison and fines and so on is absolutely nothing compared with what the Palestinians have faced for such a long time, and obviously for the last 2.5 years of genocide and ethnic cleansing and war crime after war crime after war crime. Only this week we see the Israeli government passing a law and celebrating with champagne in the most, makes you want to be sick, their new law that they're so pleased about, their capital punishment ending, but only for Palestinians, capital punishment for Palestinians who are deemed to have, not with the jury, of course. I mean, that takes me on a whole nother thread. We'll come back to that. But no, as I understand it, it's just, a judgment of a judge in some sort of military court or something.
It'll be challenged in High Court, I suppose. It won't go through because it's not constitutional anyways. I mean, that's what I've read. I don't know.
Okay, well, I hope you're right, Tabish. But like, I just wanted to set the scene though, and absolutely, sit at the feet of the people who've been so courageous, and first and foremost, remember the Palestinian people and the people across the Palestinian diaspora um, who've, whose family have been murdered and displaced and more. So coming back to that incredible day in February when it was the outcome of the hearing of the appeal against the prescription, it was absolutely, it was such a moment of joy and elation. It's hard to put it into words. And my goodness, it's been a dark, dark, dark time recently, hasn't it? A dark, dark time. And in so many ways. And this was just before Israel and the US invaded Iran as well. It was literally, it was about a week or so before, because we had two or three bits of good news. We had the outcome of the appeal, which was so joyful, and I was really, really delighted to be able. I was in London that week, primarily because we didn't know what the appeal outcome date was going to be, but I was there to support some friends on trial for a retrial for breaking windows at JP Morgan. There's some themes here, us window breakers are friends and we hang around together. But anyway, some lovely medics who broke windows at JP Morgan in 2022. So I was supporting them at their retrial, and it just happened that the appeal result was going to be at the RCJ in London on the Friday. So I was really delighted to be able to be there. And it really was an incredible moment of, when there's so much darkness and so much horror, to actually have a win is just such an incredible feeling. It felt like that every piece of action, it can feel very small when you do something as an individual, but it is when people come together, isn't it? Like the thousands of people, the thousands of arrests. I can only speak to myself. You try to not hinge what you're doing on there definitely being an outcome, because, their disappointment and madness lies. It's like you have to. I didn't do the action in August last year in Parliament Square because I knew there was going to be an outcome, or I just had to do it. Spiritually, I just had to do it. I had no choice. And I wore my little homemade fabric patch on my front, my Jews Against Genocide one that I wear on the demos in Manchester and stuff. I knew I had to be there. And so, yes, the appeal result was incredible. And within hours, we knew the government had announced that they were going to appeal the appeal, which they did, and they have. But we now know that it all gets a little bit appealing against the appeal language here, so do bear with us. But as I understand it, the government's appeal will be heard on the 28th and 29th of April. So it's not too long to wait. So those of us like myself who have been charged with a terrorism offence, charged with Section 13 of the Terrorism Act, that is up to 6 months in prison for displaying an item which indicates support for a prescribed organisation, or that's something to that effect. So there's lots of us who have been charged, and I was due to have my plea hearing in March and early this month, and they've all been postponed pending the outcome of the government's appeal on the appeal. So let's see what happens. I mean, it's so interconnected, isn't it, with the Palestinian struggle and all of our interconnected struggles against the Epstein class and the imperial powers and the tech bros and the Palantirs and all of it. And also those who seek to take away what shreds are left of our democratic system. So again, if they can prescribe an organisation that's a direct action organisation, then they can prescribe pretty much anything. And also, which chills me to the bone, but you can't help but think this government, either by cock up or conspiracy or both, is leaving massive big goals, open goals for reform, should there be a reform government. And then, that takes us on to this government's intention of getting rid of the majority of jury trials. Yes. Which, as far as I know, is something that the Nazis got rid of jury trials. So, they've got precedent, right? But the bill of which the part in it is to get rid of jury trials for the vast majority of trials has been through its second reading in the House of Commons already, which is a horrible thought because it's had a relatively low amount of media coverage. So
you wonder why.
Yeah, we don't really wonder why. It's all the way we know. But yeah, I think it's with the House of Lords. It's either I think it's in the House of Lords at the moment, or is it going through committee stage? I can't quite remember, but it's yet to come back for its final reading in the House of Commons. And we've had the right to jury trial for hundreds and hundreds of years in this country. And if we lose it, we're not going to get it back if we lose it.
Which is why this conversation, you've made it everything about other than yourself, where you see that cost in terms of, what we pay as a society. So I want to turn this question to you in terms of how it has cost you. How has this journey cost you, if at all, in terms of who you are, in terms of you as a mom, in terms of you as a professional coach. And how do you ever sit in between these worlds, asking yourself, and how do you really continue moving forward?
Yeah, the word interstitial was coming to mind, like again, that goes back to being a bit geeky and liking biology and physiology and things, but like interstitial fluid between cells. It's like another word that came to mind was liminal. Like I think in reality, we're all between these spaces, but either some people don't know it or don't want to talk about it. Like in reality, we are all living air with 430-ish parts per million CO2 in it when we go outside. We're all getting hit by a much stronger level of solar radiation than we would have done because of global heating and the diminution of particulate matter and aerosols in the atmosphere. That's a whole other conversation. So we're in this, whether we realize it or not, and we're all ingesting plastics in our food and blah, 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 blah. And we are all subject to fascism and authoritarianism. So we're all in this, but I feel unable to not say it out loud and unable to not acknowledge it and to not, my brain and my heart and my body just wants to constantly join the dots and talk about how the dots are all joined and say it out loud. So, but yeah, I mean, the cost, there has been a lot of cost. I'd be fibbing if I said there wasn't. A lot of cost of physical, emotional, financial, rare business, some degree relationship cost, lots. And I don't mean that to be all worries me about it because, in 2019 we had more freedom than we do now, but we still have some relatively-ish. I've always walked around with a big sense of obligation, and I have a sense of obligation to use my privileges. And so I don't regret anything I've done. It has taken its toll. I mean, I've had burnout upon burnout. So and I'm 7 years older than when I threw myself into this. So that takes its toll as well. Hopefully I'm 7 years wiser, but who knows? Not so sure about that. I don't regret anything I've done. I've met incredible people. I'm not the same person that I was. I feel like I understand a lot more about myself and the world than I did. I hope I've had some positive impacts on some of the people along the way. Who knows about wider impact, Tabish? I mean, I have to say, if I'm going to be brutally honest, and I don't think you'll be surprised to hear this, I've kind of, I've let go of impacting the emissions curve. That's not to say that in theory humanity couldn't, I don't think.
Yeah.
But I'm no longer carrying around the weight of the responsibility to bend the curve. And I also have been through lots of learning, lots and lots of grief cycles, which I've often described like onion layers, like peeling off more and more layers of the onion and get to another layer of kind of acceptance. And then you hit something else and you get more grief and you get to another layer of acceptance. And I don't think that process is ever going to end.
Yeah.
Because there's more layers of the onion to go, and I don't think they'll stop in my lifetime for me. But with each of those comes awareness.
Yeah.
And I think that grief is like an inverse with love, isn't it? When you love deeply, you can grieve deeply. Because it's directly in relationship.
And all those learning which you have, and obviously you've given us, I mean, through various platforms, you talk about through your work as well, but then you speak about in terms of where we are in 2026, from your own perspective, what does immature leadership would look like, and what would be your teaching to that immature leadership in terms of the denial, the short termism, or whatever that is, suppressing dissent,
Yeah.
which is right our alleys that way.
Yeah. So I think I'm hearing in there a question about what does mature leadership look like now in this time.
Yes, 2026, yes.
For me, there's a combination of things. Brutally honest, not having courage to not turn away from the facts of the matter. Like we don't hear any of our political, or for that matter, business leaders, I don't think, or do we hear any of our faith leaders or any other people in like major leadership positions, any of them really speaking about the fucking mess that we're in, the level of truth that's needed?
The clarity is missing altogether, whoever that may be.
Yeah, well, the honesty and the clarity, the honesty and the clarity, like we are facing such a multifaceted, accelerating storm, aren't we? We've got all the impacts of the illegal war in Iran at a time when we are heading towards what is looking like it's going to be a big, strong El Nino. Dr. James Hansen is projecting 1.7 degrees in 2027, as far as I'm aware. Like, this is a shit show. It's a total fucking shit show. When you overlay, and shouldn't laugh because it isn't funny, it's horrible. When you overlay that acceleration upon acceleration of global heating with a time when farmers, no doubt, particularly those in the global south, are going to have less access to fertilizer, with more erratic weather. It just, I don't need to spell it out. I know what this means. And I know, hopefully listeners know, they can fill in the dots and they can add the further impacts and echoes of that. It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And I feel it in my bones. I feel it in my heart. I feel it in my mammalian body, the terror of it, of what's coming. And so, we need brutal honesty with clarity, as you said, about the mess we're in, coupled with depth of love and compassion that, again, we rarely see. Like, that we can do so much if we couple that brutal honesty with love and compassion. We can get past so much blockage and get to a place where we can start to have honest conversations about, so what do we need to do?
Absolutely. And this is where it gives me the question too, before we go into the next one and the quick fire, where is there anything which gives you hope at all? Is there anything at all? Because it's all, given the mess we are in, I'm sure with your experience of what you've seen and the people you work with and what you've gone through, we are doing this for that hope. We have seen something in the future which gives that grounded hope to us. What would you say to that? And how can we get to that point? If there's a straightforward line to that. Not at all.
Yeah, there isn't any straightforward lines to anything, is there? You knew I was going to say that, Tabish, didn't you? I don't really do hope in a conventional sense, because there's a lot of hope that people talk about is like hopium stuff, which is, feels like it's just a strategy to hold, to not take responsibility or to turn away because we hope that some other people, i.e. the big people, the big mums and daddies responsible, will do something. And it's like that. So that kind of hope I don't buy into. I guess in a sort of post-hopes, I do believe that most ordinary people are fairly decent.
Mm-hmm.
We all have potential. We all have potential to do bad things and to do evil, don't we? We all have good and evil within us. But we're not mostly psychopaths and fascists. So, given a chance, most people want to not be horrible to each other.
Yes.
And I could give lots of data points, but to not give too long an answer to point. Saturday in London, just gone, somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people on the streets. I wasn't there because I was at the Green Party conference. That's a whole nother story. But was rammed from people, friends and people I know who were there. It was absolutely rammed, full of people expressing unity, love, togetherness, anti-racism, joy, determination, etc. So, that, and I know that the Tommy Robinson's Hate Fest his next one is coming up in May, I think, isn't it? I don't think there'll be as many people, as many of them as there were of us. I do believe there's more of us than there are of them. And I don't mean to every person who gets sucked into the far right, because, there's all the manosphere, there's all the disinformation, misinformation, and there's people who've been so badly served. That's what history shows us with Hitler and many other historical happenings, doesn't it? That far right and authoritarian and fascist leaders, and Trump's doing it, isn't he? And Farage and all the rest of them, they capitalize on poverty and austerity. They drive it in order to capitalize on it. Let's be honest.
It's on full display, that is, yes.
Yeah. So, one data point of inverted commas hope, or what I feel, right? I feel, despite being permanently burnt out, I just feel I still get energized. And I suppose I get energized by people coming on the streets. And I was in one of the London Palestine demos last year where there was 500,000+ people. And you can't help but be energized by that scale of humanity with a shared purpose. And you just think, my goodness, if we can do this, we can really do a lot of stuff. And echo that of experience in rebellions and actions past. If you always just dream, if those 500,000 people just sat down and didn't move, that would be even better. But
and make things happen.
So that's the fact that all of those movements and organizations and campaigns could mobilize that many people, and it is great. And we know that one-off marches don't necessarily change things, but it is an indicator. It's a little indicator that there's a lot of people who care and a lot of people who don't want fascism and don't want racism and don't want division. Other data points, there's lots, isn't there? Gorton and Denton by-election, Hannah's election.
Turning point that was, that gives you a lot of hope.
Yeah, and the Green Party membership, going past 220,000, overtaking the Tories, overtaking the Lib Dems. Well, that was easy, but overtaking
they did it for themselves.
I don't know what Labour's membership is now. I think it's probably a secret. It's probably plummeted, hasn't it?
We're looking at some news this morning, wasn't I, where we're talking about how the Green Party has overtaken Labour as well in terms of the opinion polls, and I don't know.
In the polls, yeah. So I think there's chinks of light. I guess there's energy. There's streams of energy to follow, isn't it? I've always been quite a believer in my coaching work. I guess in life more widely, that it's like you can sense where the energy is. Like, if there's a sense of flow, you can go with that flow. And going against flow, I always have a sense. But in my own work personally, if I get a sense when I'm going against flow, and it's like that's a time to stop. But if you can sense flow, then that's a place where we might put our energy in a fruitful way. And there's many, many more examples than I've described. I also have an absolute allergy to hopium, which is almost as strong, if not as my allergy to people using the term solution. Please don't ever let anyone say solution on your podcast, Tabish. But it gives me such massive alarm bells. And we get it across the kind of corporate climate space, don't we? Solution. But it's just such bullshit.
Yeah.
When tipping points are tipped, there ain't no such thing as a solution. It's adaptive system. You can't have solutions. You can only have interventions with consequences. I want honest.
You couldn't have framed it any better, Zoe. That is such a apt response to what I was asking. But I'm glad you didn't give me any. When it comes to hope, you framed it absolutely perfect, and which is what takes me to your one-word questions. One-word questions, where I'll be asking you, one word or a quick response to that, to some of the things which I have in front. No one better than you can answer this or get me the right word for what governance today means for you. One word for governance would stand for.
What it should mean, justice.
Okay, my next question. There's one truth which leaders avoid these days. What would that be? What is it that they're avoiding across?
I love the questions. I didn't know this was going to be so much fun. I was a bit scared of the one word.
Okay, my next one, this goes right at your heart in terms of what you know. Collapse awareness feels like what?
Honesty and coming home.
I like the word coming home. One belief you've let go of.
Letting go a belief that anyone has a bloody clue what they're doing. Because I think no one really knows what they're doing and they're all bumbling through. But lots of people aren't honest about the fact that they're just bumbling through.
Going through the motion. Okay, my last one. Again, leadership. What does leadership means to you?
I'm going to go with the word that emerged out of my gut as you said it, which was courage. Okay. It's way more than that, but courage will do for a starting point.
Okay, brilliant. That brings me to the final section where I won't ask you any question. This is an opportunity for you to leave a question for the other guest who's coming onto the podcast. We don't know who that would be. So that'd be
Mystery.
Zoe's question. That'd be Zoe's question to that individual. If you could ask one question, someone who's working alongside or at least inside institution or power, what would you ask them about that?
Okay, this is a mystery guest. Question for mystery guest. Gosh, I've learnt over the last couple of decades or more to trust my somatic reactions and to trust my intuitions. I didn't necessarily when I was, growing up and as a young adult, but I've learnt to trust them. And somewhere in my intuition or my gut told me that it needs to be a question about young people, and perhaps something like, what do you say to your children about these times or the mess we're in, or something like that? Like what. No, I couldn't land on one, so I was thinking something like, what do you say to your children, or what conversations do you have with your children about the mess we're in?
Mm-hmm.
Let's stick with what are the conversations you have with your kids? Because I think that's a really, really tough area.
It's a very important question. And I think that's very apt for whoever comes on board, because on this podcast, we talk about institution, we talk about the system within which we are operating. And this is all about the future generation as well. So thank you so much, Zoe. Thank you for the conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I'll tell you this. We went through a series of things, but those of you listening at all, this isn't about stepping away from the system. It's about asking whether those systems are actually aligned with the reality, because many people listening, they're still inside those rooms, making those decisions. And we are still struggling to name some of those feelings which we have. So if something feels off, please don't ignore it. If something feels uncomfortable, sit with it. And if something doesn't make sense, as Zoe suggests, question it. Get on to the action. Because again, systems won't change on their own. They change when people inside them stop pretending everything is fine. So this has been Builders of the Broken Bazaar. I am Dr. Tabish Zaman. Up until next time, stay awake, stay honest, and keep building in the Broken Bazaar.